Welcome back to the channel. Today, got a bit of a how-to video for you. So, you can see what that says. Press in ball joint. Now this is an upper ball joint for my 2007 GMC Sierra Duramax. Now, if you've been following me for a bit, you've probably seen this truck on the channel before. 07 Duramax, not much more to say about it really. So this video specifically will apply to 01 to 10 GM 3/4 tons and 1 tons specifically. However, will likely apply to majority of trucks with independent front suspension, whether that be half ton all the way up to a 1 ton. So yeah, I check the front end over on this thing quite regularly. Obviously I have big tires with offsets, so you know, parts like to wear prematurely, which I expect them to do. That's just part of the sacrifice you get by having wheels and tires and a lift kit like this. So I had checked my front end out recently and I found out that this ball joint up here has some play in it. The other side's still good. This arm, I actually replaced it, the whole control arm, about 3 years ago now. Changed that whole arm. That's a Mevotech arm, not their Supreme line, just their economy line. So that arm lasted me about 50,000 kilometers, which actually isn't that bad when you think about it being an economy part. Now, it is a stock replacement, so I believe this replacement ball joint from Kryptonite, it's made for original control arms, press in, so it should fit this arm. I'm really hoping it does. So we're gonna give this a shot, see how it goes, and then you'll be able to tell if you can fit a Kryptonite OEM style ball joint into a aftermarket OE style controller. So first of all, I'll show you how to check this upper ball joint. So you obviously need the tire up off the ground. You know, that's the first part to checking your front end. But more specifically, for these upper ball joints, you need to lift the front end, however, have it lifted in a way that it's almost the same as when it's sitting on the ground. So if you can see, I'm jacking right under the lower control arm, so that all I'm doing is lifting the whole entire truck up. I'm not letting the suspension droop at all. And so in doing that, I'm essentially simulating the weight being on the tire, except that the only thing hanging right now is the tire and the knuckle. It's essentially hanging on the ball joints, which is how you want it for checking them. And now the lower, if you want to check the lower, stick a bar between the floor and the tire and lift up on it and see if you have any vertical movement in the ball joint. And then the upper is in and out. So like right now, I can feel that there's just a little bit of in and out movement in this ball joint. Obviously I can't really show it on camera, but there's just a little bit of movement, which, I mean, you shouldn't have any. So the fact that I have a little bit of movement means I need to replace this ball joint. So with tear off, you can kind of see what we're trying to get at here. So if you were to follow the instructions to do this job properly, I'm pretty sure they tell you pull the caliper, the rotor, your tie rod off, your axle nut, and then disconnect your knuckle from your lower and your upper ball joint, pull the knuckle out. And then you would have all this access to do this upper ball joint here. Since mine is lifted and I have a little bit more room in here, I'm thinking I can get away with just popping this ball joint out of the knuckle and swing the knuckle over. Might have to maybe take the caliper off just so the brake hose doesn't get in my way. But I'm really hoping I don't have to deal with all the stuff down here and I can just kind of swing this over and press the ball joint out. So I'm gonna pull this nut off back behind on the back side of this knuckle. I'll hit on my steel knuckle with a hammer and that should pop the taper of the ball joint out of the knuckle. And then we can see if we can swing this over enough to press the ball joint out. One thing I will do for this nut, so you'll take it off. However, I'll usually like to put it back on a few threads just by hand. because sometimes there's a lot of kind of pressure on these bushings that want to spring up when you release this. So just to make sure that when this finally pops, it doesn't shoot way up and the knuckle falls out, it'll just separate like that. And there it is. And there it is. Now mine wants to pull on this ABS wire. So I might disconnect that just so that's not a problem. And now I got lots of room. But as you can see, like this moves really, really easy. If you've ever had a brand new ball joint in your hand, usually they're very stiff. You can move them by hand, but they're very stiff. This one just kind of flops around and does whatever it wants. So next thing I'm gonna do, there's a snap ring under here that holds the ball joint into, well, it doesn't hold it into the control arm, but it's kind of a safety in case it ever wanted to back out. So I don't have snap ring pliers here, but usually you can kind of, especially if you don't need to keep the snap ring, you can kind of just pry them off like that. There's the snap ring, still usable if I had to. Now, this is what a ball joint press kit looks like. You have your the main press here with the threaded rod. These are actually very multi-purpose. You can use them for U-joints. Actually, it works pretty well. But basically, this just goes on the bottom, and then this pushes on whatever you need to push on, in this case, ball joint. And if need be, you can push the shaft of the ball joint through the hole. But you just use these different size cups, figure out what you need to push it through the control arm. So in my case, I need to press up on this ball joint to get it to come out of the control arm this way. That might be a little bit tricky. I have to use that on the top. And then that. And okay, so the ball joint is pressed out. I cut the end off, hoping it would make it easier to press out, but it didn't. I didn't need to do that. I just thought it might help, but ended up not working that well. So had that on top. I had this, which is bigger than the ball joint, to press up into it. This for the top, and then I had this. Once I pulled the boot off of the ball joint, I just had this pushing on the bottom of the ball joint. And then I was just able to use the press, push the ball joint up into this cup. And then obviously, like, it's stamped steel, so there isn't a ton here. Just had to get it high enough to where it would pop out. I loaded up the ball joint press, and then I just kind of tapped on the control arm here, and it would free it up. Load up the press again, tap it a little bit, and then it came out just like that. So now we get to see if the kryptonite one will fit in here. I can confirm the kryptonite ball joint fits in this OEM equivalent control arm. So this is what I have to push it in. Now this cup is the perfect size. It fits exactly around the outer lip of this ball joint to push it downward. And then I use this cup on the bottom, which is bigger than the ball joint, but small enough to fit around the circumference where the ball joint goes into. So if I pull this off and make a racket, there's the kryptonite ball joint sitting in the control arm. Now, I noticed this ball joint has a little dot right here. Typically, if there's any kind of marking like that, you want it to go towards the inside. I don't know the exact reasoning why, but that's the way I was taught. The boot also has a marking on it, and it lines up very close to this, so they're both pointed fairly close to inwards. So the next thing is basically reassemble this. The kryptonite ball joint comes with a new washer and a nut, and I believe a cotter pin. Hope it came with a cotter pin. And then two different styles of grease nipples. There's a straight one, and then there's a angle one. I'll just put the straight one on and grease the ball joint. And then obviously torque it to spec as you should with everything else. All right, so I threw the snap ring back in. Again, I don't have snap ring pliers here, so I kind of struggled with that. But it can be done with a couple flathead screwdrivers. Just be careful not to rip the boot. And I went ahead, swung the knuckle back over, brought the control arm down, tightened that nut up. I checked the spec. It is supposed to be 37 foot-pounds. So I torqued it to that, and then there's a cotter pin on this style of ball joint. So you just go to the next notch where you can slide the pin in. Never ever back off from your torque spec. Always tighten just that little bit more until you can get that pin to slide in there, bend it over, and then threw the grease nipple in here. So I'll throw some grease in there, a couple pumps of grease once this is all done. But that should be everything. I should be able to just bolt the wheel on, torque the lug nuts, and that should be it. And with that, the job is now complete. Now, I didn't put the center cap on. I want to drive the truck, retorque the wheel, and then I'll throw the center cap on. If anybody's curious, lug nut torque, 140 foot-pounds on GM trucks, across all the trucks, half ton to 1 ton, 140 foot-pounds. Now, the one thing to note, general rule of thumb, if you're doing front-end work or suspension work, you typically recommended that you do a wheel alignment. Now, this is kind of an exception because we didn't actually change anything that's adjustable. Now, if I would have changed this whole control arm, then obviously, yeah, you know, I would have done a wheel alignment because those two bolts determine my caster and my camber. But since like the control arm stayed in the same spot, I didn't adjust the tie rods at all. I literally just changed a fixed component with another fixed component. That being said, there are adjustable ball joints out there which will also determine caster and camber based on the way that they're rotated. They're kind of an eccentric, depending on where they sit. So if you're using an adjustable style ball joint, yes, you will need a wheel alignment. However, in this case, it was a standard ball joint to a standard ball joint. No adjustments required technically. Now, if you're having tire wear like I am, that's a different story. You should probably get a wheel alignment anyway, but you know, if you have a good alignment to start with, you just have a worn ball joint, you know, change the ball joint and you should be fine. So hopefully this video helped at least somebody out there. This is probably a little bit different than the typical style of video you'll see out there on changing any part really. Just goes to show you don't always have to follow every single instruction. I know that's not really something that people preach a lot, but there's a lot of unnecessary steps sometimes, and in this case, you know, I could skip pretty much all of the unnecessary steps and do this job very quickly. Now, if I had the right tools, this would have been probably like a 20-minute job. Instead, I made do with what I had. It took me like an hour to do this job, but just imagine how long it would have taken if I actually would have done all of those unnecessary steps to change one simple part. So again, hopefully this helps. If it did, comment below, leave a like, subscribe if you'd like, and see you in the next one.